Hello, healthcare humans. Thank you so much for coming back for another episode of The Other Human in the Room. So, today, the title of this episode is In Praise of Mediocrity. And it's kind of how I'm feeling today. I am still recovering from an upper respiratory virus infection that I got. Was it last week or 2 weeks ago? I can't remember. I'm on the back of not being able to go into clinic for almost 2 weeks now. First, because I was unwell, and then because my kids now are unwell. They're in the other room binging PJ Masks. So, if my voice is raspy, if a little munchkin interrupts this recording, you'll know why. And, to some, that would make this podcast mediocre, substandard, unprofessional, right? And I'm here to just celebrate all of those things. I got the word mediocrity. I mean, I knew it existed before last weekend, but I remembered how awesome that word is this past weekend, where I was the keynote speaker at a retreat for my university's faculty retreat. It was an incredible experience. I talk about it a bit on Instagram, like I sort of shared the story of it. So if you follow me on Instagram or TikTok, you can listen to the whole story there. But it was like a highlight of life, certainly highlight of career, to be in this room with fellow family doctors who I usually find kind of intimidating. And instead we were like laughing and crying and sharing how hard it is to do this job and how the job makes it hard and how we struggle to really center our humanity. But my hope is that those that came feel inspired to do so, after. And one of the things that one of the participants talked about, and I think it was important, not just that they named it, but because there was a section where there was like sort of workshopping and discussion, and then people were like sharing for the room to hear. But this particular person, this particular faculty member, so this is a person who is a family doctor, also teaches people to become family doctors. Everyone in the room were teachers as well, right? So a group that really is probably very used to at least performing, if not believing in excellence and achievement and success for themselves, and to honor and cultivate that in their students, right? And so not only were those things true of this person, but she also holds like one of the highest positions of power, like leadership wise, in the department. And so when she said, I can't remember if she was the one who actually said it first, but at one point someone was saying, maybe what we got to really be doing in modeling for our colleagues and for our students is mediocrity. Like, what if actually always trying to focus on perfection, which is impossible in an inhuman story, is not actually helping anyone? Like, what if we need to model mediocrity? And to hear the person in leadership say, like, you should see how many things I do that are mediocre. I'll give you a long list. And like, it was like a big laugh moment. And there was something about having a group of like, in some ways the highest achieving physicians, and everyone being like, yes, let's do things mediocre. It was just like a release. Like I felt like I just wanted to like do a praise dance right there in the middle of giving this keynote, because um it feels like a bad word, to think. I was like picturing like, oh well, I make some social media clips, and I often, the stuff I end up posting, I picture someone commenting like, wow, this doctor thinks it's okay to be mediocre. What's she even doing in medicine? Because it's like, don't say you're going to be mediocre. Say you're going to do your absolute best every time and strive for greatness and be your ultimate achievable self, And I'm here to say that's all very nice. And something different happens in your body and in your mind when instead you're really aiming for mediocrity most of the time. And just like for a change of pace, seeing what it would be like if you were aiming for mediocrity. I did look up the word origin for mediocrity. So, like, in case everyone's like, maybe if English isn't your first language or something, or if you're not quite sure, usually when we say something's mediocre, we're definitely insulting that thing. And usually, like, what do I think of kind of colloquially when we say mediocre? We're like something that's subpar, something that's not amazing. It's just like medium, you know? It's not terrible, but we usually mean it's terrible because it's not the best. I mean, there's the psychology behind the fact that mediocre is an insult is kind of the whole problem, isn't it? Because like mediocre, it's like saying, oh, they're average, but mediocre, and that's also a slam, especially if you're like a high achieving thing. Like you're not trying to be average, even though like average is most of us guys. I don't know what to say, but mediocre to me at least has even more of like a your own. You're just so mediocre. You're so middle of the pack. You're so none of these have to be insults as I'm saying them out loud. If we're in a pack, most of us are gonna be in the middle, folks. I don't know what to tell you. But that's kind of what I think of as that word. Like you're describing something as not exceptional, you know, not above and beyond. And that was one of the things we talked about at the retreat is like, why do we have the above and beyond category? And why is it obviously that all learners are like aiming for that? And how is that not psychologically maybe that great for our learners to always be trying to be above and beyond? And what are we modeling for them, right? Things to think about. Very fun conversations this weekend. Anyways, so first of all, me just describing the definition of mediocre, hopefully it already makes it clear, like, can we just say that mediocre is not even an insult, but is just like descriptive of something that's kind of, if you could say the norm, not, in the middle of the standard deviation curve where most of the things are lying, you're mediocre, right? And when I looked up the definition, it had an interesting kind of image behind it. So, not the definition, the word origin. So apparently, mediocre comes from medial in Latin, medial, which means middle, as we're aware in medicine, and ocris, which means mountain. So if you're saying you're mediocre, that means you are in the middle of the mountain. And so I have climbed a pretty tall mountain. Before I had kids, it was like a dream trip that my husband and I went on to Africa, and we climbed Mount Kilimanjaro. And the middle of that mountain is still a lot of effort. Like, I think there's something about we think mediocre means lazy. And what that does is discount how much work it still takes to climb half a mountain. Basically, like, oh, you only got to the middle of the mountain. Are you kidding me? That's like the air was already thinning halfway up that mountain, And I like the image as well because it also points out what's not great about the top of the mountain. Like, especially if you're trying to climb to the very, very top of the mountain every day. If you're trying to climb to the very, very top of the mountain in every moment with whatever task is in front of you, you're trying to top the mountain with it. You're trying to be exceptional with every single thing you do in every area of your life. That is so much effort. Also, speaking from experience, being at the top of the mountain, it's got a great view, sure. But the middle of the mountain, you get a good view too, frankly. And the top of the mountain is not actually that compatible with life. The top of Kilimanjaro, the air is thin. We had to take medicine ahead of time because there's going to have altitude sickness. You are huffing and puffing, taking every step. The air is very thin up there. It's not really designed. There's no vegetation. There's no natural life because it's too high. Like, if you just want to use this word origin as a metaphor, the top of the mountain is not where humans are supposed to be. We are not meant to be that high all the time. It's cool to get there once in a while and go, wow, and having those like mountaintop experiences. I would say actually my like giving that keynote was like a mountaintop experience in terms of like that was incredible. And I know like if I tried to do everything I did there and all the prep I did for it, like all the therapy I got for it, for every single thing in my life, nope, that's not possible. I would be on the ground. I would be under the ground. So it's sort of a perfect metaphor actually to be like, what if we were striving for middle of the mountain? Frankly, what if some of the time we didn't even try and climb that mountain? What if we choose which mountains we're even going to climb, right? So that's where the word mediocrity I like even more than like I'm aiming for average or I'm aiming for run of the mill, because mediocre, first of all, is a secret mountain metaphor in it, which I love, a nature metaphor, but also because it's like it's sort of like reclaiming an insult. It's like I practice mediocre medicine. I practice mediocre medicine most of the time, if not all the time. I don't know, depending on someone's definition, right? So what's good about that? So the main thing is that what's good about it is that it means that you're actually doing things at all. Because, like I just said, if you are striving for absolute excellence in every moment, and you know what? I bet folks that are listening can like get pretty close to absolute perfection and excellence most of the time for a lot of things, and that's how you got to where you are. But first of all, have you noticed that the castle is crumbling and it's hard to maintain? Have you noticed how much energy and effort it takes for you to get there? Have you noticed how often you trying to strive for that perfection and excellence is really almost about like maintaining other people's perception of you as being excellent, while meanwhile behind the scenes you definitely are having to cut corners and be mediocre at stuff, but now you're ashamed of that and you're hiding it, and that's what's creating like imposter syndrome a little bit, you know? So being mediocre is more authentic, it's more honest, because especially in this day and age, maybe there was a time back in the day when there was one drug for diabetes, when half the diseases didn't exist yet, we hadn't given them a name. Maybe you could be really, really excellent because, you know, the amount of knowledge, medical knowledge out there could fit in one human brain at some point, possibly, but certainly not now. Like, there's too much. There's too much information. There's too many completely disparate and conflicting ideas about what medicine is, as I've talked about in a previous podcast. There are too many extremely conflicting and outsized expectations, whether it's like from guidelines or our college or whatever, and certainly from our patients, as they are influenced by, you know, wellness industry and whatever thing they've Googled, right? Like the expectations are outsized for what we're capable of delivering. We are only ever going to be mediocre. And what if that's a beautiful thing? What if we just like make a cozy little home, get a little log cabin going in the middle of the mountain, and we actually learn to love it? That's the thing. We feel shame about it as if there's something wrong with it. But really, it's the only option, and it's kind of great. It's certainly good enough. Like when we're like, "Oh, is it good enough?" It's like, why wouldn't middle of the mountain be good enough? Why wouldn't that be good enough, right? If it's getting it done, why wouldn't that be good enough? So I'm just here to praise the word mediocre. So I wanted to give a list of things that I feel I do in a very mediocre way. Again, just sort of to unshame them for myself and to give you some ideas for yourself of where maybe you're like, oh yeah, I'm already doing this, but I feel really bad about it. Maybe I could keep doing it, but start feeling at least neutral about it, of like, look, I'm doing this mediocre, which means I'm doing it middle of the pack, which means I'm like one of the crowd, which means I'm in the middle of the mountain. I'm going to acknowledge how much I'm already doing just to get to mediocre. And what if that effort gets to count, right? And just like shifting your perspective on it. And then maybe from others of you, you say, oh yeah, I see how I'm striving for perfection every time with this thing that Joan's talking about. And maybe hearing her say, she does it mediocre gives me permission to try and let go some of that perfection because it's keeping me up till 2 a.m. or whatever it's doing for you, right? So here are some things I'm mediocre at. Around the house, I think I am really not even middle of the pack. I think I am very low in the pack. I'm near the bottom of the mountain for cleaning. If you're watching the video, nah, it looks pretty good. So if you look at my background and you think that this looks really messy and cluttered, this is neat. You should see the rest of my house. You should see what I just swept for the first time in a number of days with two small children, the crumbs under the kitchen. So I am, you know, especially in the pandemic, that's when my like barometer, I've always really actually been soothed by clutter. I don't know, growing up in a house where it was always very clean. Who can say why? But I've always find it cozy. I find like it's lived in, and it's like soothing to me to be around some like mess. So I, especially in the pandemic, having like a brand new baby and a toddler, you should see what our house used to look like. You know, it was borderline squalor, and that was great, and that was beautiful, and I celebrated it greatly. So that's one thing I would even say less than mediocre at, honestly. Another family, like home based one, is parenting. So, for example, my children binge watching PJ Masks in the other room. Some would consider that a failure as a parent. Some would say, how dare I? Some would say, oh, it's what we got to do, but they feel like shame inside. I'm like, yes, this is mediocre parenting. Mediocre parenting includes when they're, you know, being extremely firm / at times yelling at them when I'm frustrated at them. And then I apologize after. I'm not planning to do it, but it happens because I'm human. And then I repair afterwards. To me, that's mediocre parenting. I don't know. And it just feels good. One activity at a time. Like my goal for them, well, I don't have a goal for them. My goal is for me to take care of myself, honor my own capacity, and show up for them with as much love and attention as I have to offer in a given day. And then let's see what happens to them. And to me, that's like the kind of parenting that actually aligns with my values. But I imagine that to others, that would be very mediocre parenting. Like maybe my kids therefore will not maybe get the grades they need to get into medicine. I don't know. We'll see. And also, I don't need them to go into medicine at all. I don't need them to do any kind of thing. Let's just see what happens with them, honestly. So that's another home-based thing that I'm mediocre at. Turning to work, something I was very recently very mediocre at was completing disability forms. I often actually delegate disability forms to a nurse colleague of mine, but I had a few that they were a little too complex for her to do because of the story behind them. And then when I went to do them, I'm like, these are too complex to do. And also, this one form had so many boxes and so many questions, and I would just kind of got mad at it. So, and especially because the form explicitly requested that I also attach all of the chart notes. So I'm like, sorry, you want me to summarize it, and you're just going to read my chart notes anyway? So what I did is I said, see attached chart notes for relevant details. And I just copied and pasted that into most of the fields. I did that form extremely mediocrely, with extreme mediocrity. And we'll see what happens with it. What's often happens, sometimes they get accepted, and I'm like, that's amazing. Sometimes they don't get accepted, and then they send me a new form, and then I send whatever information they have back. It's fine. Either way, I had to get it off my plate. It was never going to get simpler because the story behind it is kind of complicated and the form doesn't fit what the situation is. Nothing about that situation is going to change. So I did the form in a really crappy manner, and now it's off my desk. And that's the best part. So that's the joy of mediocrity, is you do it and it's done. Mediocrity is how you create space in your life. Mediocrity is how you honor your capacity, right? So it's how many spoons do I have to give this thing today? And that's the number of spoons you get. And sometimes that's real cute and tied up with a bow. Most of the time, it's pretty bland, pretty mediocre. And I love it. Forms don't deserve my best, frankly, the vast majority of the time. I'm saving my best for other things. And that's the main thing behind why it is beautiful to be mediocre at most things. It's because then the things you actually care about, the things that all are actually fun for you or satisfying for you, or that you're the most passionate about, that matter most to you in terms of your values, you can have a mountaintop experience with some of those. It's worth the extra effort, right? So other things I'm mediocre at, my inbox in general, I really just keep trying to do the one thing at a time, move on, send the e-referral, send the consults. I know a lot of people really double and triple think and, spell check all their referrals to make sure it's okay for the specialist. And I'm like, I'm writing what I think is a helpful note to the specialist with the key facts, but I'm not, if they think I'm stupid for sending them, if they actually do request more information, that's fine. I'll do it, So my personal standard is more than a single word. I know I can remember, if you're a specialist listening and you've received a referral that's say you're an orthopedic surgeon, and the referral just says knee, yes, to me that's less than mediocre, and I can write more than knee. And so if I write more than knee, if I'm right knee, query ACL tear or something, I'm writing more than that, my brain used to think that wasn't enough. It had to actually look pretty. I had to make sure I attached every historical thing, or I don't know what, I'd have to write pertinent positive negatives, write several paragraphs for each referral. No, in fact, that's usually not helpful, because then the poor specialist has to read all of that, right? So how do we go from mediocre? People who have trouble being mediocre have a really excellent mediocre. People who struggle with this, what they consider mediocre is everyone else just loves and appreciates, honestly, most of the time. I also practice, I think, pretty mediocre clinical decision making in terms of according to guidelines, for sure. I definitely am mediocre at following guidelines. I'm mediocre at choosing wisely. So I use my wisdom as best I can, but does that mean I always don't order the test? No, I'm pretty mediocre. I still order a decent number of x-rays and MRIs. And is it following the exact ethos of choosing wisely? Probably not. Sometimes I'm doing it because the patient won't stop asking me for it. Is that mediocre? Probably. I'm sorry, healthcare system, etc. But this is what I'm talking about. I only have so much energy. I'm only going to have so many conversations with so many patients, so many conversations with so many colleagues. And in the rest of it, I'm going to be mediocre. And that's going to save my energy for what really matters to me. I'm definitely mediocre at general medical knowledge. Don't ask me too much about pathophysiology anymore. I don't know if I could pass the test. And, if I'm curious, I look something up. It's actually been fun to release the shame of not knowing to an extent that I actually have rediscovered my curiosity for learning. Because it used to be I had so much anxiety and shame of oh my gosh, I don't know. And then if I would learn something, it would be in this really pressured way of I'm trying to catch up. I'm already behind. I'm trying to cover the shame that I already don't know it. And then the information wouldn't even sink in. But now that I'm yeah, I don't know lots of things. I had to look up sarcoidosis recently, and I don't know anything about sarcoidosis, but now I know a few things because I looked it up because it was relevant to a patient case. And I actually think the information is going to stick around a little longer because I wasn't coming to it from this I'm so ashamed I know nothing about sarcoidosis. I was like, oh yeah, that exists. What's going on with sarcoidosis, right? It's so interesting what you get back when you accept and sort of intentionally celebrate being mediocre and doing things in a mediocre fashion. It's just really interesting what it gives you space for, And for me, so it gives me space to go quote unquote above and beyond in select cases. So, when I'm being mediocre and not going above and beyond and saying no to requests that I could do that would be helpful, but that I'm nope, that patient really does have the resources to do it themselves. No, I'm no longer sending the 5th reminder for that thing. That means then the select cases where I really want to spend time speaking to the specialist, I really want to spend time advocating for my patient, I actually have the space to do so. Mediocre is how we then have truly excellent moments. When we're always striving for excellence, I think then we end up being not feeling certainly excellent about anything. But if we strive for mediocrity, excellence emerges. It's sort of funny. And excellence by a standard that matters to us. A friend sent me this article that was talking about the state of medical education. And I won't go into the article, but it made me really mad. It was basically it was kids these days, they're so sensitive and you can't give them any feedback. And it wasn't a take I was into. It wasn't my perspective. And one of the things they said is do we have to give up achieving excellence in order to support the well-being of our learners? It was all about has well-being gone too far? And I was just I have a differing opinion from this person. And I just thought that notion they kept going back to was excellence that means we'll have to give up excellence. And I really wanted to ask this person what their definition of excellence was, and if they thought any individual in healthcare was actually achieving excellence right now. I think it's a myth that anyone's achieving excellence currently. We're all pretending to achieve excellence, and we're all giving each other impossible standards of excellence and criticizing each other when the other person doesn't achieve our standard of excellence, in part so that no one looks at us and notices that we are also not fully achieving that standard of excellence because it's impossible, because it doesn't exist. Can we let go of the idea that we ever had achieved excellence? And especially in these times when we're extremely under-resourced and things are excellence doesn't play a role. Let's all actually acknowledge the mediocrity that we're in, mediocre and in terms of how well we can care for our patients, mediocre at best, right? And I see we as in sort of the collective system And the way we can do that is if we individually like, hey, this is my mediocre effort. This is my mediocre offering for the day. And that's amazing. Like, that's incredible. That means I helped people today. Like, really in praise of, in celebration of mediocrity, not saying, oh, I'm settling, but being like, no, this is reality, is that I'm not that I'm mediocre as a person, but like, what's wrong with being in the middle of the mountain as a person? Maybe that's even fine. But let's make it less about identity, right? Like, I practice in a mediocre way. Mediocrity is a central tenet to how I practice medicine, because what it means is that I'm showing up and doing things and helping people, period. And there'll be lots of people who think that's just mediocre. That's not good enough. Yes. But I did it and got that prescription out the door, saw the person, thought it was an ear infection, like, whatever. Can we really honor the humanity that mediocrity is like trying to shame, you know? So that's it. That's my whole podcast. I think it's a shorter one than usual. So you're welcome. Hope that's what you wanted this week. My final statement is just like, so what would it be like? What's the thing in your life that feels like, oh, I couldn't aim for just mediocrity with that? The thing you think you can't aim for mediocrity with, that's the thought experiment I would invite you to have this week. You can honor being mediocre at anything. I recently introduced my kids to Chris Hadfield. I don't know what he would have to say about mediocrity. Maybe he's like, no, I always strove for excellence. Who knows? People have different ideas of how they get to be different places. But I bet Chris Hadfield, you might not know who he is if you're not Canadian. He's like our most beloved astronaut. He sang David Bowie songs in space. He's amazing. I love him. And I'm sure he's mediocre at a lot of things. I mean, someone could have listened to his recording of David Bowie and be like, well, that was a mediocre effort. I didn't think so. But like someone, he's like, well, it's not David Bowie. Like someone could have called it mediocre. Who knows? That person would be just objectively wrong though, because he was singing a song in space. But anyway, like, you see what I'm saying? Like, any person, even like Taylor Swift, she must be mediocre at a whole bunch of stuff somewhere, not her songwriting, but actually some of her songs are less good than others. I mean, everyone has their time. And so like, what's the thing that you think you can't be mediocre at? And what if you were? Even the stuff that I prize most, like maintaining a good connection with patients and having like really connected encounters with them. I am definitely mediocre. That doesn't mean every encounter I'm like, I see you, I love you, and I'm like, having a goodwill hunting moment with them. A lot of them is like, hey, how's it going? Yeah, you good? Okay, here's your script. Bye. And like, that's it. It's not like I'm some spiritual leader for each of my encounters, but I'm there, I'm present. It's good. So like, you see what I mean? I hope this is coming through. I just hope that like I'm inspiring you to really embody middle of the mountain. Let's set up these cabins together in the middle of the mountain and just be, and some of them at the bottom of the mountain. Let's do that. Let's do that for things like cleaning personally, right? So can we do that? Because it's what's real. It's what's probably already happening. And the places it's not already happening, those are the things that are sinking you, that are burning you out, that are keeping you up late at night, that are distracting you from your life, right? So my beloved healthcare humans, can we be mediocre together? I would love to know what you choose to be more mediocre at. If you want, like if you're on Instagram, DM me or like go to my website and like through the contact form, like email me. Let's make a mediocre revolution, folks. Like, let's be mediocre together. Okay. I'm rooting for all of you to be as mediocre as you are, wonderful as you are. And yeah, I'll talk to you next time.